Welcome to GFX-Sector podcast. This is the 7th episode, and like the last time, a special as well. My guest today is Ed. Ed, for the people who might not know you, can you tell us something about yourself and the company you work for?
Yeah, I work for a company called CeX, or CEX, which is a second-hand electronics retailer. My own background was originally fine art. I started in fine art painting, and after a few years I moved into installation and other forms of fine art. I did an MA at Chelsea College of Art and Design, and after about 10 years of becoming increasingly broke, I moved over to graphics and was lucky enough to get my current job.
Yeah, what is the goal in your life? Like, what do you want to be in 10 years or so?
Happy. No, I think basically the ultimate aim would be to be in a position where you can make the work that you yourself consider to be good, and the people will come to you to request work from you that you find stimulating yourself, rather than simply making concessions to perhaps adopting a style you're not completely comfortable with because of the requirements of clients.
Yeah, when was your first contact with art in general and with digital art in particular?
That's an interesting one. I always drew as a child, right, all the way through, mostly pencil and paper. Would draw on pretty much anything, including tables and walls and anything else at school. Digital art's interesting because I was born in 1977, so I'm maybe a generation older, and was originally trained on my degree course I was trained in painting in a traditional way, which meant starting with pencil and charcoal and moving into oil paint and acrylic paints, which meant the bulk of people I was training with were all largely technophobes and Luddites, so we didn't really appreciate computers until some time later. Plus the technology with, I think Photoshop was just about coming up to speed where you could accurately draw and paint in Photoshop. I only bought my first computer in 1998 because I was too embarrassed to ask the technicians how I was going to write a dissertation for art school. Having bought it and discovered the possibilities of sequencing images on it, making video, very early days video in those days, analog capture cards, and producing video work on VHS tapes, and increasingly the possibility of, I remember my first Wacom tablet I bought probably out of a cheap bin in a local computer shop in probably about 2000, 2001, something like that. I suddenly realised that it was a legitimate tool for making decent artwork. Instead of for a long while I was then teaching very basic Photoshop as a technician at Chelsea College of Art and Design, and one thing we learned very fast is if you have a class full of art students, never ever tell them where the filters are in Photoshop, or you will get a big pile of rubbish for an entire year.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Some filters are very overused, and
yeah, particularly at that point, everyone got very excited about solarizing anything, or just messing with the color balance, or motion blur, anything like that. It wasn't very good for a fine art course where you were really looking for quality of ideas, and instead you got some very, very bad photography with an awful lot of...
We were talking about digital arts. Digital arts evolved really quickly in the last couple of years. What do you think about these changes?
I think I may have a different perspective on it, purely because my own knowledge is possibly a generation older. So I'm still impressed by things that most digital artists today will take for granted. They'll think that's normal, and I'm probably still impressed by very simple things, like a baby with a shiny object. But I think certainly as far as the media is concerned, in motion graphics, I think the quality of rendering and the power of the machines has come on so far that, I mean, particularly in mainstream films and so forth, before there was an absolute overkill of CG being used for some time, which wasn't very good. And for my mind, at least, or for my aging eyesight, the quality of CG now seems extremely high to me. And yet a lot of directors are deliberately going back to using a mix of prosthetics and CGI, which I think is possibly the way forwards. But I don't know. As far as two-dimensional graphics is concerned, it's very encouraging to see so many people where I, as a teenager, would have sat in my bedroom working on a sketchbook using paper or charcoal. I think the community aspect of people painting digitally and having a peer group around them of other people that will also enter the same thing and being able to exchange ideas and offer decent constructive criticism to each other is very, very positive. Obviously there's a huge amount of rubbish on the internet, but it's nice to know that people that are making good stuff and are enthusiastic can form a sense of community with people that aren't geographically near them. I'm stating the incredibly obvious to somebody a generation younger, but to me this is still impressive and very, very good news.
Yeah. How did you find the switch from drawing on a paper to drawing on a tablet? Was it hard for you to adjust to it? And what are you doing more often today? Do you draw by yourself and then scan it, or do you draw directly on the tablet?
It would depend on where I ultimately intended that design to end up, and whether it was intended to be complete. The output would be vectored, or it would be a rasterized image. If I already know that it will only be used at one scale, and I want a very textured result, it may be that the texture from scanning a loose pencil drawing on paper, once scanned, you may think, I like this texture that's come up, and I like the way it looks when it's been scanned. But of course, if you're intending to make something that needs to be vectored and maybe used at a variety of much larger sizes, or you're just intending to get a much smoother, more illustrative effect, I may simply draw into Photoshop to begin with. I think also for me it depends what kind of style I need to be using for a particular thing. I very much enjoy using Photoshop as an airbrush tool because I can make very large solid areas quite quickly that look almost CG and give you a good sense of volume. But if you were doing something that was more like for example, simply a black and white vectored image, I might work in pencil just to get my ideas down, but you'd inevitably return to Illustrator to clean up the edges. I don't know if I have a view. I don't think I prefer paper to Photoshop or vice versa. I find both good to use, but for different reasons, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. How would you describe your workflow like? How do you start and how do you go on when you work?
Generally, the marketing manager grabs me by the hair and say, you've got 3 hours to do it, and I tell him I can't do it in 3 minutes. And then we argue, and then there's fighting, blood up the walls, and then eventually I give in and I draw onto paper. Joking aside, it sort of depends if you've got enough time to come up with a decent idea. My workflow is largely governed by not having a great deal of time to do anything, which means if you have enough warning to come up with a good idea, sometimes it would be nice to have at least 3 stages of development for what you're doing, but sometimes you only have enough time for one. So you immediately hope you've grabbed the first idea that you had that was a good one, and simply continue because you won't have time to. I think in an ideal world you'd have enough time to produce enough thumbnails, enough sketches to step back, pick the best one of them, do a first version, realise maybe the standard wasn't high enough, possibly do a second version, and finally allow this thing to develop to a decent quality. In the commercial world, you don't necessarily have enough time to do that. So a great deal of the time you're simply, if you have the benefit of enough time to develop a good thought process and perhaps be able to change your mind later on, then you're lucky.
Do you think then it's important to work with somebody else too sometimes, or do you would like it more to just make the things yourself?
I think a collaborative approach is either much better or a complete disaster, depending on whether it's actually a collaboration. Most of my experience at the moment, I don't have many people to collaborate with, but increasingly as my workload increases, I have to start handing over half-finished pieces of work for other people to complete, which means you have a very clear communication with that person. To some extent, it can turn into an argument about whose authorship it is. On the downside. On the upside, if you end up working with people that you find really inspiring, that can show you new techniques and actually make your work better, I think if collaboration is done properly, I think it's an excellent idea. But really, you will, by allowing yourself to release your own ego from it and go, this is not going to be the thing that I normally make, let's just see what happens. I think you take the restrictions away from yourself and you end up with something it's not your work, it's not your collaborator's work, it's just something much better than both, if you're lucky. If not, everybody makes concessions and you end up with something that nobody's happy with. So it really depends if you're collaborating with people that you have the same, that you like and you have a similar outlook. Well, maybe you don't have to like them, but you do need to have similar artistic goals, otherwise it will be a disaster.
Yeah, what would you like to recommend to a beginner who just started with painting or maybe drawing?
Enjoy it. More than anything, enjoy it, because you won't keep doing it. I think my personal view is you can teach anyone to draw to quite a good standard if they want to, but it's normally people that have simply done that for a very long time because they love it. If you don't love it, why are you making yourself do that? It's a very time consuming process and you're going to make your life, I don't think anyone that doesn't enjoy it would do it.
Depends on the money, I think.
Yes, true. Also, another perhaps useful piece of advice is stop waiting for your work to be perfect, because lots of people, including me, do that. You don't want to put it out for the world to see because you don't think it's good enough, and you don't think it's good enough, and you don't think it's good enough. First thing is, you will hate everything you've done about a week later. You'll like it when you're doing it, and then you'll look at it the next day and you won't like it anymore. Your own opinion doesn't matter, it's the people that are looking at it. So you have to get some people to look at it. So stop criticising yourself and just make the next thing. Yeah.
Yeah, what kind of equipment and programs are the best in your opinion?
I don't know a very large number of them. Photoshop and Illustrator, I think, are the two things I use most, which I like very much. I think used in conjunction with each other, I think they're very good. I very much like After Effects, but I'm in no way very good at it. So I think if I had a reason to use After Effects more, I think I would really like that. But to be honest, I think you can spread yourself too thinly. You can try and specialise in too many areas, and then you become average at all of them. So for my money, normally Photoshop and Illustrator, more Illustrator these days, but that's purely practical because of my current job. I'm interested to find out how many programs on tablets and portable devices, they seem to be coming up to speed very, very fast. I've certainly been playing with Autodesk Sketchbook Pro, and I haven't used Photoshop Touch yet, which I hope to. I just wish developers would keep up for Android as well as for Apple iPads, because obviously developers normally make stuff for Apple first, which is irritating if you prefer Android. I don't have any preference really on whether people use PC or Macintosh, but I think the price of Apple products is prohibitive for a lot of people that are starting out. We already, like Wacom tablets and so forth are already quite highly priced. I know there are several alternatives, and I know a lot of people are worried about buying a cheaper tablet that will break. I don't have any extensive knowledge of the other manufacturers, but I'm hoping people using tablets and so forth and much cheaper software on them will be able to produce equally high quality of output. So instead of spending hundreds on a full version of Photoshop, you can buy Photoshop Touch for maybe, in the UK, is about £6, something like that, which, if it turns out to be a good tool and the quality continues, people can work on a cheap tablet using a cheap version of Photoshop and still get really good results. I think this is a very liberating experience, if that turns out to be the case. It might not. We may all get really, really annoyed with the cut-down versions of the programs for tablets.
Yeah. Who are your favorite artists and why?
Oh, my favourite artist, fine art-wise, would be. Let's go back to the classics. I've always liked Cézanne, and I like Giacometti's sculptures. Holbein, Dürer. I have an embarrassing tendency to like pre-Raphaelite painters. But if you want to get really honest about it, most of my influences were the comics that I read when I was a teenager, which would be quite British ones. They were mostly 2000 AD. There was a couple of artists in particular who worked on those comics. One was called, I think it's Simon Bisley, I think. Stuart Bisley, and a couple of the others. I don't know. I always liked Robert Crumb's sort of psychedelic comics in the 60s, that whole alternative wave of comic humour there. And likewise, like so many other people, a lot of, quite early Japanese influences as well. I don't know. Other things, I think also, your favourite films and everything else, really. Those films that you like and all the rest, they all feed back into it. And you can get just as excited about some piece of graffiti you saw on the wall as the next thing. So, don't know, does that answer the question?
I think so, yeah. We are a community where mostly people who do it as a hobby. And what would you like to say to them when they want to work in the media sector in the future?
Don't get tired and jaded with it. The other problem being, if you spent a long time, the holy grail for everyone is that you get to keep making in your style that you love. The reality may be that you have to work in a variety of styles, some of which you don't like as much. Or alternatively, you have an opportunity to make what you consider you can make something really good, and unfortunately you simply don't have the time to finish it to the level that you want. What I would say was, the business side of it, which means you are effectively providing something for a client, you can to some extent remove some of your own self-critical traits and say, if my client is happy with this, then I should be as well. It doesn't necessarily feel quite as satisfying, but it's certainly worth knowing that you will have to do a lot of projects that aren't really to your taste. This is the problem. Also, there may be a lot of people who are equally as good as you. Some may be better. What you really need to do is to be enthusiastic and reliable. There may be a lot of people who are better than you, but if they keep missing deadlines, you'll get the job and they won't. Yes, don't let it change what it is that you love about your work as well. You may have to do a lot of projects that you're not particularly excited about in order to get to a level where you can start picking your clients better. I myself have not arrived there yet. It's a balance between making concessions about what you're prepared to do. When you're in a position to choose really good jobs, then excellent, but until then you may have to. Also, don't work for free too much. Because there is a tendency to work for free quite a lot of the time, but there has to be a point where you say you may devalue yourself by working for free. If people really want you to do that, then they need to see that you take yourself seriously as well. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, okay, that's all that I have so far. Do you want to say something to the users of our forum?
Yes, keep doing it, have fun, and offer each other constructive criticism. Don't just go, yeah, it's great. If somebody needs to work on their shading or something, tell them politely, but tell them. Never take the criticism too personally. Your work is not your ego. It's just this thing you do, and the next piece is always better than the last one. Thank you very much.
Thank you too for the interview. I will see you guys at the next podcast, and yeah, see you.
Cheers. Thank you very much. Bye bye.